All right, guys, bang, bang. I have Taylor here with us. Thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure. I feel like you have one of the coolest jobs on the internet because you get to sit and write about internet culture. Let's just start off with kind of your background and how do you get to that position where kind of you are the voice of the internet culture to some degree.
That's very kind. It is definitely a dream job. I always tell teenagers that reach out, like it's, a job that you get to spend all day on YouTube or TikTok or Zoom now. But I got into media actually about a decade ago through Tumblr. In 2009, after graduating college, I was just working a bunch of temp jobs and got into Tumblr. And that's kind of what got me into media, doing social media. I spent most of my career running social media accounts for brands and writing on the side. And then about 3 years ago, I transitioned to writing about this stuff full time.
Got it. And so as you think about like internet culture itself, maybe just start with like, what does that mean to you, given you spend so much time understanding it?
Yeah, I think internet culture is like an internet culture reporter, I think is going to be one of those job titles that's like webmaster, where it kind of will probably seem irrelevant because every year I feel like the internet is just more ingrained in our lives, especially now in the midst of a pandemic. We're literally living online. So I kind of think of it as culture coverage with a tech bent. My technical title at the New York Times is technology reporter, and I definitely love tech and, look at things, sort of look at how people socialize and how culture moves through these platforms, like any kind of social platform. That can be, something that's made to be a social platform like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or something that, another type of technology that people are just using to connect and socialize, like Google Docs or Zoom or things like that.
Yeah, and it feels almost like, the internet culture is actually really it used to drive culture. Now it's almost becoming the culture, right? There's less and less of a difference between the two to some degree.
I think there's almost no distinction. I mean, I do think that you have some people that are still kind of offline in certain ways, but it's even true for older people. I mean, if you think of boomer culture, it's very driven by the internet. Old people love memes more than anyone. Boomers are very online in other ways, usually email. So yeah, it's definitely kind of just culture at this point, especially pop culture. I mean, the areas that I cover in terms of like entertainment or music or movies, Netflix, it's just culture coverage, which is why I'm on the style section at the New York Times, which is our, we sort of cover lifestyle and culture and things like that, rather than being on like the business side where I'm covering more of the business of tech companies.
For sure. And one of my favorite sayings right now is like the memes are the message, right? Kind of taking the bent of like the medium is the message. Maybe talk a little bit just about how you see, whether it is memes or GIFs and things like that, how they're infiltrating a lot of society.
Yeah, well, I think as a society, we're moving towards visual communication, and that's been true for a while. I mean, memes have been around for, I think, 20 years. I went to some retrospective at the Museum of Moving Image in New York on memes, and I was honestly surprised. I think the first meme they had was like, what, all your base belong to us, or something. It was like literally from the year 2000. So, the concept of memes as we understand them is these kind of like internet pieces of content communicating a message, have been around for a while. And, we're also using platforms that allow us to express ourselves more visually, like Instagram stories, all the creative tools we have there, Snapchat, now TikTok. You can express yourself in this very visual way, which lends itself to memes. And just as things travel around the internet, they gain kind of this shared understanding or knowledge or humor to them. And so I think it's just easier to kind of share and riff off people's thoughts or content or ideas. And it's just easier to do that I can't speak. It's more and more easy to do that every day.
For sure. And it feels like you, of all people, like if somebody said to me, who has the best pulse on the younger generations on a lot of these platforms, like I think you are probably the first person that comes to mind for many people. So maybe let's just start with going how you think about each platform for the younger generation, right? So there's Snapchat, there's TikTok, there's Twitter to some, bit, but just like, how do you think about how they're using each one of those platforms differently in comparison to each other?
Sure. I mean, I guess I would say the main difference that I see with young people is just the extent to which they use it. I mean, if you think about Instagram, sorry. If you think about Instagram, a lot of millennials or older users treat Instagram, they treat the product sort of the way that they understood the product when they initially got on it, sometimes like in 2013, 2014, when it was really primarily a photo sharing app. Whereas younger people, that's really sort of where it's like the core of where they express their identity and their friendships and stuff like that. So it's much more of a communication app. I mean, Snapchat is another one that I think older users kind of stopped embracing, but it's still like a primary messaging app for a lot of young people. And TikTok, I kind of compare a lot to Twitter, actually, because it is a place where especially young people will go to express their ideas. It's almost like a mini YouTube in the sense that you can make these short videos. They can get surfaced and go viral. But you can also live stream, you can also comment, you can also DM. It has a lot of other kind of capabilities too. But sort of like Twitter, it's like where I think while a lot of older people might go to Twitter to express their thoughts on maybe the president or something, younger kids will tend to do that on TikTok.
Yeah.
Though a lot of them are on Twitter too, but they usually tweet about like Stan, Billie Eilish or something.
For sure. And it feels like, there's a entire culture on these platforms, right? So like TikTok is a great example where there's obviously the TikTok influencers, there's certain ways that people use it. And you wrote an article about even the way that people use certain functionality. And one of them was like the live streaming while people are sleeping. Maybe talk a little bit about just like, that seems like such like a nuanced use case for a platform where, most older people would like be horrified at the idea of that. Whereas some of these influencers had really kind of understood like, hey, this is a unique way to use the platform.
Yeah, it's funny. So back in 2015, I was obsessed with this live streaming app called YouNow. And I would make my friends go on it all the time. It never honestly really took off, but there were YouNow influencers. Some of them became musers that are now TikTokers. But it was another live streaming platform where the benefit was to sort of stream as long as possible, but obviously it's very hard to fill content for that amount of hours. And there was this trend that started called Sleep Squad that took off among people, and it kind of became this thing that people did, which is live stream themselves sleeping. And then now we see it on Twitch and TikTok, and it's kind of a thing. It's kind of a meme, and it's a joke. It's like, hey, how many followers can I get, when I'm sleeping? But it's also a way to like go viral because it's so funny, and because what it does is provide these sort of pop-up chat rooms. So it's kind of like a lot of people will also just stream an inanimate object, and what they're doing is really just they want to get that like chat going, and then people just start connecting and chatting and having this whole thing sort of within this pop-up chat on the live stream. And so that's the appeal for users that are watching it. It's not that, yeah, it's a dark room, someone's sleeping, and that's kind of funny for a second, but you're also able to kind of like chat with these other people in a way that you wouldn't, have access to. So it's sort of like these little ephemeral chat rooms.
Yeah, and it seems like as part of that, these applications aren't being used solely for the videos, right? So like the TikToks, for example, you could sit and I think it's really unique how they've put the platform together in terms of you kind of just scroll and continue to see video after video after video. And if you're just using it for the first couple of times, like that's kind of the surface use case, but the comments and kind of all of these subcultures within the platform aren't very obvious. Is that something, going back to like the younger demographic, is just all of their friends are doing it and they kind of learn it by talking to each other? Or is it something that it's just actually like the time on the application itself drives you to use some of the other features?
That's something that I would love, like data from Instagram on, for instance. I wrote about like comment culture on Instagram a couple years ago, and it's hugely driven by teenagers. I mean, if you go in the comments of a lot of stuff, it's like meme accounts, people trying to get, publicity, and then a lot of teenagers or young people primarily. I mean, of course, there's still it's not just teenagers that comment, but they really do engage in that way. And I don't know, I don't know if that just I don't know if it's driven specifically by time spent, but I imagine part of it is the culture, like tagging friends, responding to things. And I think a lot of young, stars on Instagram also have more interesting comment sections than
Yeah.
an older.
It feels like, and Instagram's, I think, a perfect example where you see the comments, but then there's also like a whole nother layer of usage where people take the photos or videos that are posted, they DM them into these groups, and they have these group chats around that. And it's like that conversation is more protected. It's private. It's with that kind of a selected group of friends, but that is almost the same type of thing that happens in the comments to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, I think both are places to socialize. I mean, the benefit of DM is that you can share links. You have a set group of people. I hear of people meeting in the comments a lot. And I think there's like somebody that was saying that they met friends actually in the comments of the Comments by Celeb page. Because there's all these like comments by accounts now that are really popular too, that sort of highlight some of the best parts of the comment section. So I think people are kind of going there to make connections, find people with similar interests, and then hop into group chats. There's so many interest-based group chats, that people are involved in on Instagram, and I get added to them a lot, and I love it. And so I just think it's another way to socialize. I think that, a lot of users that are maybe more adults, I don't know, I know some moms that have Instagram group chats, but I think they're also more likely to use things like iMessage.
Yeah, speaking of moms, one of the trends that just blows me away is on TikTok, these kids who are pulling their parents in, especially now because most of them are home, and their parents are growing like pretty big audiences simply by dancing in videos with their kids, right? Similar to kind of, I think, how the Vine stars all made each other famous. Now kids are just doing it with like the closest adult to them who just happens to be their middle-aged parent.
I know. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about sort of like how it's all family TikTok now because everyone's involving every member of their family. I saw a girl just this morning celebrating. She was giving her father a cake because he had hit 100,000. So it's been fun. I think everybody, when you like an influencer, you like a certain person on TikTok, you like to kind of follow everyone in their orbit, whether that's their close friends or their family. Their family usually are the ones that have the kind of like behind the scenes access to them, and post, funny videos. A bunch of the big TikTok influencers have kind of transformed their whole family into influencers, like Addison Rae, her whole family. And Charlie D'Amelio, obviously, like Mark D'Amelio is like an influencer unto himself now.
Yeah, and I guess part of that is, so Charlie D'Amelio is, I think, one of the first ones that I saw where she's now got 50 million followers, give or take.
The most followed person on the app, yeah.
Wow. And so she's famous, her sister's famous, her dad's famous, and her mom's famous, right? I mean, literally the entire family. And then they all got signed by UTA together, like as a unit. So maybe let's talk a little bit just about like the business behind a lot of this, because it's kind of fun in games to see people post the content and grow, but there's really, really big businesses that are being built here. Just kind of at a high level, like how do you think about, the commercialization or the business behind all of it?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people sort of don't understand is the business behind it. And one, how much work it takes to grow that business, and two, the sort of like ancillary businesses that are built up around the influence industry. I mean, you mentioned agents. A lot, the big Hollywood agencies all have very robust digital divisions that sign, people like the D'Amelios, hoping to turn them into essentially the next Kardashians, or sort of grow their brand even bigger collectively. But then you also have all of these other people that support influencers. You have kids that just make money essentially by helping influencers optimize their YouTube thumbnails and editing them in a certain way to get them clicks. Or you have, somebody that runs a brand marketing platform that just partners brands with influencers. There's like a lot of sort of businesses that are helped to sort of set up to help support the influencer economy. It's not just like traditional entertainment businesses like managers, agents, acting coaches, singing coaches. A lot of these people have those people also in their orbit.
Yeah, it's crazy because I think, when you get into the game of, hey, just creating content's one thing, but now all of a sudden we're going to start optimizing the thumbnail, right? We're actually going to strategically place you in videos with other influencers to cross promote accounts. And it almost feels like a lot of this loses the authenticity. But the ones who are really good at it, they're able to kind of hide the business a little bit behind this. How much of that is being driven by the kids themselves and like they want it to be a business versus they've got a family member or somebody near them who's a little bit more professional or experienced that's driving it?
Yeah, their family members absolutely are never more experienced than these kids. These kids understand monetization on digital platforms better than truly, I would say almost any digital marketing executive, a lot of them. And if you look at people like David Dobrik or James Charles, right, both of whom are very young influencers, they're not teenagers. I think James is like 20 and David's 23 or something. They have teams around them, but they're incredibly adept at staying on top of the trends, getting in early and promoting themselves on these new platforms, growing their audiences. And they really do want to make it a full-time career. And I would say being an influencer, content creator, or whatever, you're essentially an entrepreneur, right? You're running your own small business. Often that business is your personal brand, but it can also just be an interest-based account that you run. If you're a car vlogger and you just post about cars all day, you can end up sort of running essentially a little content company about cars, right? And so I think like any small business owner, these people work really hard. They understand their business better than anyone. And it's usually, it's driven from them because if you have some outside person, that can help motivate you to a point, but it really has to come from you if you want the business to succeed.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that a lot of these young kids, like this is the dream, right? When I was growing up, it was like, hey, I want to go play in the NBA or play for professional sports. People maybe wanted to be like a traditional actor or a musician. It feels like now there's a lot of these kids who are saying like, no, I actually want to be an influencer. Like that is something to aspire to be as a career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like the number one thing a lot of kids aspire to be. I saw some stupid thing that was going around last year of like, oh, in some other country, kids want to be an astronaut. In America, they want to be a YouTuber. And, people share that and they sort of joke about it, which I get. But, if you're a YouTuber, well, one, that's the work that you're seeing modeled every day. When you log on the internet, you're following people that, these that are talking about their job every day. Like, these YouTubers are talking about what it's like to be a YouTuber, how they're making money. They'll give a behind the scenes tour of like, the factory that's developing their merch or things like that. So they're talking about that career in a really detailed way to kids in a way that honestly, a lot of kids don't have any clue what their parents do, but they deeply understand sort of like how an influencer business works. So that's part of it, I think, is why they think it's aspirational. It's the main version of work that they're seeing on the internet every day. And then two, there's a huge amount of autonomy that comes with running your own business. A lot of people mistake wanting to be an influencer with wanting fame. But a lot of these kids, what they want is, they want autonomy and they want to be able to run their own company based off their own interests. So if you can run a small business that's, gets you access to certain events, maybe because, you're involved in some world, I'll use cars as another example. Cause I know this kid, I can't remember his name, but he's on YouTube. He's very into cars, right? Like, in the past, maybe he would have been a car journalist, to be honest, but, he makes all of these really cool driving videos. He gets to test cars before anyone else. He gets to work with all these major car brands. That's a dream job, and you own your income. You set your own hours. You have enormous flexibility. I can't imagine why you would want to do, some entry-level job instead of sort of owning your own thing.
Yeah, it's almost like the barriers to entry are so low because literally, you've got a cell phone in your hand. Can you record a video, post it on one of these platforms? And if you're good at it, all of a sudden you can gain the audience and it goes from there. And another piece that, in conversations I have with people who are trying to understand this stuff, I always say like, this isn't new either, right? I mean, if you look at Oprah, Tony Robbins, like all of these people basically were the influencers before we called them influencers. They just had to do it on different platforms. It took a lot more capital. And that, do most of these younger kids understand that kind of this isn't new? It's just in a new form factor, or are they just so focused on what they're doing that they don't really kind of make the historical connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think Oprah is different because she's more of a traditional celebrity. And so there's all these sort of gatekeepers, right, before getting there. And I don't think that she really owned her own IP and business from the start. Tony Robbins might be a better example. I mean, I think some people in certain careers, right, he's an entrepreneur ultimately. So yeah, I think that what's different is that, it's people building themselves up on these digital platforms and sort of owning their followers. And you're right, that is not new. I mean, it's funny, when I did this story recently on agencies, I was talking to this guy from Abrams, which is a big sort of talent agency, and they were signing MySpace stars back in 2006. So I think it took a while for it to emerge. I mean, I got my start on Tumblr, and there were certainly other people that were very big on Tumblr at the time that I was, that have sort of launched careers from that. But it's more pervasive now. I think, every year kids are more and more sort of on the internet. These social platforms get more power. And so I think that it sort of progressed into mainstream culture in a different way. Just the fact that I have a job covering this stuff, I couldn't get a job. I tried for a long time to write about this stuff full time, and there really wasn't an audience, I would say, until 3 years ago. So, I think it's entering the mainstream in a different way.
Yeah. Speaking of entering the mainstream, like how many of these kids want to stay on the digital platforms, right? So be the TikTok influencer or whatever, versus they want to cross over into like traditional movies, commercials, television shows, and things that maybe we think is more traditional media. Like, do they actually want to cross over, or is it they shun that and they want to stay on the digital platforms only?
I don't think they think of themselves as like specific to platforms. Like a lot of kids that come up on TikTok, they all have different career aspirations, but what they want is to own their own businesses and brands. I think that, I was talking to this 18-year-old TikTok creator recently, and he's been offered a, potential show of his own. And he's just like, well, that's going to impede on my YouTube show, and and the YouTube show, you see direct benefits. You're able to monetize that. You get the ad money. The people that watch become your followers, and you grow. When you go on a TV network, first of all, it's hard for people to find, unless it's a big enough show, it's kind of not worth it. So I think it really depends. It also depends on whether these kids want to go into entertainment. Entertainment is really only a portion of the influencer economy, right? You have a lot of other people where, their dream is to launch a fashion brand, right? Or you're a beauty influencer. You really want to like productize yourself and launch your own beauty brand. Maybe that means like going on a fashion, maybe Project Runway or something, but ultimately like your goal isn't to be an actress or a singer. So I think for those, the small portion that does want to be maybe a traditional Hollywood person, it's a huge step up to have a following, and you'll definitely get in the door faster than people without a following. But the majority of kids that I talk to, it's not that they want to stay on digital platforms forever. They just want to own their own thing. And I think they see as sometimes like doing these bigger deals with more traditional platforms as kind of like giving up some of that control.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that you see them as entrepreneurs, right? Because I think that's like a very unique lens. And it would make sense that if you are that entrepreneur, you want to build the brands and kind of drive the business that you have, you don't want to go get distracted, right? So like that would make sense. But how do they actually make money, right? So like there's a whole bunch of things that I've heard, but like in your experience, like what are the main revenue sources for somebody who's amassed one of these audiences on the digital platforms?
Yeah, kind of like every small business, they all have sort of a mix of different revenue streams. There's no one way that all influencers monetize. The primary way that people or the primary thing that people think of when they think of influencers is usually brand deals. The assumption is that influencers just make money by posting SponCon all day, sponsored content. That's not really true. Certainly some influencers do make money from brand deals. I mean, most influencers, that's a huge portion of their revenue stream. But they're also making money on pre-roll ads, for instance, on YouTube. Merch has really emerged in the past, I would say since 2018, really when FanJoy came on the market and started working with a lot of the top YouTubers. Merch has become the primary revenue driver. I mean, David Dobrik, for instance, one of the most popular YouTubers in the world, makes hardly any money on YouTube, but he makes his money through selling merch and through this clothing brand that he's developed called Clickbait. So launching your own merchandise and product lines are really big. So you'll sort of either license your name or work with a company to, develop a line, for instance, for Nordstrom, where you take a portion of that profit, or you develop your own product. For instance, this girl, Gal Meets Glam, Julia Engel, she's a huge lifestyle influencer, developed this very sort of Southern unique style and launched her own clothing line. And it's now, massively successful. I mean, she's still an influencer, but that's the way she makes all of her money. She essentially runs a clothing brand. So you're seeing more and more of that. Again, influencers are trying to keep control and they want to directly monetize their audience. They don't want to partner with someone or rely on some ad dollars that could go away tomorrow. A lot more of them too are charging for exclusive behind the scenes access. So that could be charging people for close friends content on Instagram, or setting up a Patreon, launching a podcast, having a newsletter where you give exclusive, photos or videos or things like that. There's a million other things, but those are kind of all the big ones.
And do they learn that from like seeing a Kylie Jenner go and create the kind of the lip kit and her whole line of products, or a Kanye West really license his name essentially to create Yeezys with Adidas? Like, are they seeing that and saying, I basically want to do that in my own world? Or are these, again, they're just not necessarily making that connection between what they're doing and what some of these much more traditional celebrities?
I think that influencers are pioneering that. You see people like Kylie Jenner take that model because influencers pioneered that model, growing this digital platform and then turning it into using it to launch a product or something like that. Like that is classic sort of influencer monetization strategy. I think the really successful, especially young celebrities, are monetizing that way and copying these influencers. In terms of licensing, I mean, celebrities have always licensed their names, so I think that's probably a more traditional business. But you see even actresses now charging for close friends content. That was something that was started by people on the internet. So I think it actually flows the other way more than you'd think, where you have these groups of people online pioneering new monetization strategies, and then it sort of ladders up as bigger and bigger people adopt it.
Yeah, it almost feels like just like in technology, innovation's the necessity. Comes from necessity, right? They don't have the big teams and stuff. You've mentioned a couple of times the close friends Instagram content. I'm assuming most people listening don't know what that is, and it's fascinating. So maybe just talk a little bit about like how an influencer or celebrity uses that functionality on Instagram to monetize.
Sure. So close friends is essentially this feature on Instagram where you can just post content on your Instagram stories just to a select group of people that you select. Influencers adopted it because it's just another way to gate your content behind sort of a paywall. So, people charge the influencer will charge maybe $3 a month. And if you pay that or you support them at that level on Patreon, you'll get access to those additional videos posted to Instagram stories that are only, gated to close friends. I wrote a piece a couple years ago on like up and coming rappers and like sort of SoundCloud rappers and how they've pioneered monetizing every single feature on Instagram. And I think it's an example of this kind of like ground up, like, I guess like these monetization strategies where these rappers are essentially charging for literally every single thing. I mean, they'll charge to post, they'll charge for they'll charge to comment. If you're a fan and you want me to comment, like, great, that's going to be $5 from you, whatever. I mean, if you think about it, like Cameo is kind of built off this, right? Like asking for shout outs from certain celebrities. Prior to Cameo, people were just negotiating these things on Instagram. So Yeah, so I think that it's those kind of monetization strategies are definitely things that influencers have pioneered. Really, people on the internet have pioneered. I mean, a lot of these rappers, a lot of sex workers, a lot of other people that have been shut out from more traditional forms of monetization have developed these sort of other schemes that have been more widely adopted.
Yeah, and maybe talk a little bit about how these influencers like work together to grow their audiences. So we saw, the Vine stars all lived in the same apartment complex, pull each other in. I've heard of Instagram groups where, like, if we're all in the same group, I post, I DM it into the group, everyone goes and likes and comments on it. Just like, what do you see there, and is that becoming more pervasive where people realize, like, hey, let me team up with other influencers and really grow our audiences together?
Yeah, I would say people constantly underestimate collaboration when it comes to growth, because if you're collaborating with the right people, you're going to grow. And I think what you see is a lot of people have come up this way. I mean, I was a big fan of O2L, which was this YouTuber group back in the day in like 2012. And that was this group of guys that met at VidCon and decided to kind of all partner up and create videos together, essentially every day of the week in this collaborative channel, and grew huge. And you see Vlog Squad, you mentioned the Vine generation, like you have to kind of partner up and collaborate on content in general, because just posting videos of yourself gets old. You want people in your orbit. And if you can find sort of other like-minded people, it makes your content more sticky and engaging, because even if I like, you, for instance, maybe I follow you on YouTube and then you constantly have your friend Joe in the video. Even if I'm not like a huge fan of Joe, I might just follow Joe anyway because he's friends with you. And so it's just kind of this way to grow your influence and also, help others, build up others, and they'll build up you.
Yeah. And so this then led into these hype houses or content houses. Like, explain what these are and kind of like what the hell is going on with a bunch of teenagers all living in the same house.
Yeah, well, again, these have been around for almost a decade. Like the O2L house, the Vlog Squad had a house. You mentioned 1600 Vine, which was back in 2013. This apartment complex that all these Viners lived in. So creators have always sort of lived together in these collaborative houses in mostly Los Angeles, but they're kind of all over. I mean, the original Phase house was in New York, I think, actually. So it's great to kind of like live with people that you collaborate with. It provides more opportunity for content. Usually when you're coming up, you can't live in your own apartment. You can't live by yourself. So it's cheaper to live with other up and coming creators that have the same goals as you. You see this kind of thing happen in the comedy world, right? Or actors that start out living together. But I think with the TikTok generation, they grew up seeing all of these collab houses on YouTube and wanting to emulate that lifestyle that, as soon as they have any amount of money and clout, they want to move to LA and start something like the Hype House, for instance, which is this TikToker collective. Now you have the Sway House, there's the Clubhouse, which is, a bunch of people that left the Hype House, and sort of, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of them. Jake Paul had his Team 10. There was the Cloud House. These places serve as little hubs almost. And they're not just for the influencers that live there, they're for other people in that kind of generation of stars to come over, collaborate, hang out, or people to stay, places for people to stay out when they're in town.
Yeah. And my understanding is that there's not a lot of kind of hardware or infrastructure that's in the houses or that these people are using, but maybe just talk about like somebody who's got, 50 million followers, even 1 million followers, like, are they literally just using their cell phone to do all this? Or is there a little bit more that goes into the production that might not be as obvious to people just watching the content?
Yeah, with TikTok, it's cell phone, maybe a ring light, maybe a stand. Although at the Hype House, when I was there in January, they were using literally a smart water bottle and a toilet paper roll as their default stand to film all their videos. So I think it's a lot more lo-fi than people would probably imagine. Sometimes you'll have like a DSLR to film YouTube content, but a lot of times people like the sort of more authentic, raw way it looks if you film it with an iPhone, and it's just easier. A lot of kids I see just edit it all on their phone, which is insane. But that's more for content on YouTube and Instagram. If you're doing something with more higher production value, maybe for YouTube, sometimes you'll shoot with a camera, but it's not like you have a massive production crew with like a TV camera or anything like that.
Yeah. Does that make it harder for either the traditional players or folks who want to bring this stuff to television and try to recreate it, but it isn't necessarily authentic to them? Does that make it harder for them too, because they're used to coming with 10 people in a crew and lighting and TV cameras and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people always reach out to me because I think over the years, people have wanted to do different reality shows. I think that Jake Paul had his Team 10, essentially a reality show on YouTube. Um, and I think that he did have maybe a part of a production crew for that, or like he had, it was definitely more highly produced than normal content. A lot of big YouTubers have, specific editors, and they'll have maybe like a boom mic or something. But I think it's probably, I don't know. I don't really know anything about the TV world. I think they would probably be shocked at how lo-fi a lot of stuff is, but I don't even know what is required for TV because I'm so out of touch with the TV.
But it's crazy, right? Like literally you're talking about people who, as you said, they have like a toilet paper roll, right? And they're using that as a stand, and they actually are probably getting more views on some of the content than a traditional television show.
Oh, 100%.
And so the world has kind of really, really changed. And you also wrote this piece on like the American teenager bedroom and like how that's kind of changed and almost become like a headquarters for a lot of this stuff. Maybe talk just like, what exactly does that mean, right?
Yeah, I profiled this 15-year-old kid, Rowan Winch, who is a little entrepreneur. He ran a bunch of meme accounts, which is another thing that teenagers do to kind of get clout and followers on the internet. And I do think a lot of people are doing a lot of this stuff from their bedroom. I mean, the more entertainment, like personal brand people may move to LA, but then you have this whole generation of young kids that is getting into things like e-commerce, right? Like drop shipping, using meme accounts, growing meme accounts to promote that, which is essentially influencer marketing, right? Growing digital brands and kind of engaging in the internet and promoting yourself on the internet, but they're not necessarily doing it like with their own face on it. And that's kind of what I was interested in, is just like how these kids are running these little companies from their bedrooms and how challenging that is, one, to manage when you're young, and two, just how volatile it is, because you have none of these kids have any contact with the platforms. They're usually doing stuff that's technically violating, terms of service, like growth hacky type spam stuff. And so yeah, that was what I guess was interesting to me, and why I wanted to write about that kid.
Yeah, and it feels like, again, not new in the sense of there's always been kids who have had their little side hustles, really just trying to get some cash, right? It was kind of even when I was growing up, whether it was selling, things that you had, selling sneakers, going and buying and stuff. But then the internet opened it to like, hey, I can now sell to anybody in the world. These kids take it an even step further, whereas, even maybe 5-10 years ago, let's say merchandise, for example, you would have to literally put an order in, take risk up front, get the actual inventory, and then try to sell it. And if you sold it, great. But if not, then you're left holding, a bunch of sweatshirts that you don't want. Drop shipping and things like that obviously changed that. And it feels like these kids really, really understand the logistical side of this and that the true business behind it. It's not just, hey, I've got an account, let me, just turn a switch on and all of a sudden money starts pouring in, right?
No, they're so sophisticated in terms of their marketing, branding, understanding of e-commerce, understanding of like promotion and digital marketing in general. That doesn't mean that they don't make constant missteps. I think a lot of kids are always DMing me on Instagram because they're getting banned or blocked, or, they got kicked off Shopify for something. But it is, I think it's great that all these kids are sort of learning that stuff. And it is through this influencer culture. It's sort of like wanting to be an entrepreneur and wanting to own your own thing and leveraging the attention economy to, get you there.
Yeah. And I guess as part of that, like if you're a traditional business, you not only are very good at kind of your business yourself, but you also are probably pretty good at measuring, are you being successful or not? Are you growing? Is revenue going up or down? What's your cost of acquisition? All these metrics that would almost go in like an investor report. Mm-hmm. Do they have any understanding of that stuff? Or is it more of just, Okay, so
Oh,
from a data-driven standpoint, they're actually pretty sophisticated
oh
as
my
well.
God, these kids. I was literally on the phone with this 19-year-old who runs a really popular giveaway company with a 16-year-old. And they orchestrate these massive Instagram giveaways, which are essentially growth marketing, tactics for influencers, that they sort of have an influencer that hosts a cash giveaway, and then they sell spots where it's basically you have to follow these 70 accounts, to enter the giveaway, and then they'll charge all those 70 accounts to be part of it and make money on top of that. And this teenager was just explaining to me, the difference in CPMs and all of these different forms of advertising, and why giveaways are, currently the highest, but, you have to get this kind of thing, and how, he has these calculations that he's determined in terms of how many followers each person, each sponsor can expect, and how that affects his pricing. And this is a kid that is, I believe, a freshman or sophomore in college, and I truly sometimes I'm like, why are you even in school? I understand wanting a degree, but I think, and his 16-year-old partner, it'll be interesting to see if he goes to school. But even if their business fails, because the giveaway bubble is definitely a thing on Instagram right now, and I don't think it'll be there forever. You have this really deep understanding of analytics and Instagram and advertising, basically. So.
Yeah, and I guess one of the reasons why a kid would still be in school, even though they're doing this, making money, is because their parents, right, are probably to some degree saying like, "Hey, you're going to go to school." What is the parents' reaction to a lot of this? Like, are they supportive of their kids? Are they, scared shitless and saying like, "I can't believe my kid is, playing around on the internet and somehow money's showing up"? Like, what do they just generally think?
Yeah. And by the way, I think kids should go to school anyway. I think a lot of kids I talk to go there for social reasons too. It's fun to be in college, even if you don't ever go to class, it's still fun. And if you're making money and you can afford to pay for it yourself or get a scholarship, that's great. A lot of parents that I talk to don't understand this stuff at all. I mean, it's Rowan's mother was very shocked by a lot of it. I think he was also keeping money, as a lot of kids do, in PayPal accounts. So you can keep money in PayPal, and never transfer it to a bank, and then use it. All these teen retailers accept PayPal. So you kind of don't have to let your parents know necessarily the amount of money coming in. You're not claiming it on taxes. So I think some parents are, worried about that. I know Rowan's mom was like, where is he getting this money? This is suspicious. But, once realizing that, her son was running these sort of like businesses, was like, I'm really proud, just save it. I always tell kids to save their money as well. Most kids don't. I have to tell you, the majority of kids that I talk to make some kind of financial misstep, which I think it's good to make that, those mistakes when you're young, when you're a teenager, and your, quality of life is not going to meaningfully change. Some kids also use it to help pay their parents rent or cover medical costs for their parents, or whatever, their parents need. So I think a lot of parents are grateful when they see their kids making money. It's, just the way they would if their kid went out and got a part-time job somewhere else.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Obviously, I think you and I have a very rosy perspective of a lot of this, and we generally are fans of it and understand why it's happening. But there's also kind of a dark side to a lot of it. First, like, what is like the bad behavior look like from the adults, right? So whether it's parents stepping in and like taking the kids' money or doing anything like that, or even like the agents and people who realize, hey, you're an influencer, you've got a big audience, like let me quote unquote help you, but that help really is just help me make money off of you rather than truly help you. Like, do you see any of that happening?
Well, I have to tell you, not from the big agencies. I mean, like UTA, CAA, I mean, it is like a huge sign of achievement for a lot of kids to work with those big agencies because of the deals that they get them. And I haven't seen a lot of parents taking advantage of kids, to be honest. A lot of these kids are more sophisticated than their parents when it comes to the internet. But I do see sort of predatory managers come in a lot of the time. You see these management companies or management collectives come in, sign kids to bad contracts, promise them the world. and really kind of act like vultures. That is what is really disturbing. I saw one contract recently that somebody sort of leaked to me that I showed to an entertainment lawyer, and he was like, this is the most unethical contract I've ever seen. And, there are these big kids out there that have signed it. So I think it's stuff like that that is upsetting. I think that the entertainment industry has always preyed on young people, unfortunately. So in that sense, these people are not new. These people were scamming wannabe models and actresses before all of this. The good thing is that a lot of times, these kids have their followings, and so that's good as long as they don't sign away their IP or something. Like they, can at least have their following sometimes to kind of negotiate back on some of these people. But yeah, that's kind of bad. I mean, there's also the actual scammers. So like people that are constantly trying to hack these kids, take down, get them taken down. There's all the drama accounts that feed off of drama between these kids and start feuds, and it can get really toxic really quickly. I mean, a lot of kids end up quitting because of bullying. It's mentally exhausting to live on the internet all day. So I would say there's like a lot of sort of bad mental health stuff that can happen to you as well. I mean, burnout is huge.
Yeah. What, like with the contract where you say like it's unethical, like any kind of specific things that are in there, or just generally like it's obvious that somebody's taking advantage of somebody else?
Yeah, it's obvious somebody's taking advantage of somebody else. I mean, for instance, I'll give you a public case that I wrote about as well, which was the Tfue lawsuit against FaZe Clan last year, right? Like Tfue, one of the best Fortnite players in the world, had signed to FaZe Clan, one of the best esports, sort of this like influencer collective esports conglomerate, that lives in this massive house in LA, content creators. And, Tfue rightly sued to get out of that contract because in some cases they were taking up to 80% of his revenue for certain things, and certain, winnings was, he got really bad splits. And he's like, look, I'm the #1 Fortnite player in the world right now. And yeah, maybe FaZe Clan helped me get there a little bit by promotion, but these are really bad terms. And, that actually caused FaZe to completely revamp all of their contracts with talent. So, I think you kind of need at least one influencer to be like a whistleblower if they're in this kind of bad situations or working with bad management. I think FaZe tried to do the right thing because they realized that, whatever, but I don't know, the lawsuit is sort of ongoing. They definitely got people into some bad contracts. With some of these TikTokers, they're just so excited to be in LA and they're very swept up by this lifestyle. And I think they're promised a lot of things. And so they'll sign away, rights to their content, for instance, not really understanding what a big deal that is.
Yeah. It's pretty sad too, because the kids in many cases probably don't actually understand it. Right. And so it's one thing if you enter a contract and you understand what you're signing, and then maybe later you have regrets, like, okay, that's just kind of, the part of business. But when you sign something and you don't understand it, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, I made, $1 million last year, but 800,000 of it I didn't see. And then I got to pay taxes on 200K. Like, it's probably not the best situation.
Yeah. And it's the kids, it's not the kids with, for instance, Mark D'Amelio as a father who understands this kind of stuff. It's kids that often have more working class families. Their parents are not, they don't know a lawyer, for instance, that can take a look at it for them. And it's really a bummer, how many people are taking advantage of it. And that's sort of, like I said, always been true in the entertainment industry as well, with up and coming models and other people. It's just, happening new generation.
You recently wrote about strip clubs on Instagram. What the hell is that?
Yeah, well, like everything else that's closed in the pandemic, so are strip clubs. And so I wrote about how, they've kind of been reimagined on Instagram. There is this guy, Justin LaBoy and Justin Combs, P. Diddy's son, who were hosting this thing called Demon Time, sort of this Instagram live strip club show. I literally was surprised I got it into the Times because like the Times can be kind of prude about that stuff, but yeah, it's basically just, you know, women stripping on Instagram Live during these sort of pop-up shows. Obviously the handle gets banned immediately, so they'll kind of create a new handle for each show. You know, they pin the girl's Cash App, and then the girl, you know, essentially makes money through tips from the Cash App. And since they started doing it, this guy, Tory Lanez, copied them and started this thing called Quarantine Radio, where he was kind of also letting women dance. And then Magic City, a big strip club in Atlanta, also was offering virtual lap dances, basically this woman dancing on Instagram stories for you.
It's pretty crazy how it also falls in line with other tech trends though, right? Like we all see kind of these virtual worlds popping up. And so like, I don't know if anyone expected strip clubs to go virtual, right? Because of the quarantine, but it does fit within more and more things going online. And you can quickly see how if they can figure out the monetization, they can figure out their way around a lot of the platforms, right? And that's another piece. It's just like constant cat and mouse game between the platforms and a lot of these creators trying to police something like this versus the kid who just gets reported, you know, essentially a bullying situation. How do you know who to take down, who not to take down? And it feels like it's pretty complex for the platforms to navigate as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they're always in a race with the platforms.
For sure. And the last thing is on podcast. There seems to be this like very big trend of taking traditional podcast where there's very little interaction with fans, right? Because it's basically a one-way communication channel and it's trying to build that community around it. We see some of the top podcasters in the world doing everything from, you know, literally live in-person shows where you can buy tickets and show up to doing more of the like pay and you can get access to exclusive content, AMAs, you know, live video. But you also wrote about like Facebook groups and things there. You know, is that something where the podcasters are trying to learn from the influencers in the digital platforms? Or are some of those people actually both, right? You get an influencer who starts a podcast and just naturally understands the digital platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole resurgence in podcast culture is driven by this growth in influencer culture. I mean, podcasters are influencers a lot of the times. They're people that, you know, their fans really look to for making decisions or, you know, shaping their outlook on life. And so they have this fandom around them that is very influencer-like fandom where they have this close, they feel like they have this close personal relationship with the podcaster, you know, in the way that they bond with a lot of influencers, right? Like it's like a YouTuber that you're watching every day. Also, I think it's all of these YouTubers getting into the podcast world and launching things like Discords and Facebook groups that has, you know, pushed a lot of more maybe traditional podcasters to also get into those types of realms. But it's been really interesting to see the growth in podcasts because every YouTuber is like starting a podcast now. And I think it's just another way to monetize and kind of like, it's a natural thing, you know, it's like a lot of them do YouTube podcasts where they can, you know, you can also watch the person and
it makes sense. You talk to hundreds, if not thousands of these influencers. I can't imagine that they are all super sophisticated, articulate, mature, etc. What are some of the most ridiculous stories you have of either communicating with them, because you're doing it through like Instagram DM and not traditional means, or also like ridiculous inbound that you get that's unsolicited?
Yeah, well, I did talk to the influencer who licked a toilet seat in the coronavirus challenge last week, which was an interesting conversation.
I'm assuming that person is not necessarily, you know, showing up to Madison Avenue and asking for brand deals.
No, but she did launch this song, which has now been streamed, I think, 1 million times on Spotify, and she's making a lot of money because it went viral on TikTok. It's called Skinny Girl Anthem. She'll love that. I can't even believe that I just even gave that a shout out because this girl is like the #1 clout chaser on the internet. And I was like, I am not writing about you. Stop. A lot of my conversations are like, I am not writing about you.
Do they pitch you stories? Like, will kids literally just DM you on a platform and be like, hey, will you write a story about me?
Oh my God, Anthony. As you know, I had to I started sort of deactivating my Twitter and Instagram sometimes. The amount of messages that I get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of messages a day. almost all from young people. I would say teenage 22 and under, asking for articles. They know that in order to get verified on Instagram, for instance, you need a certain amount of press in mainstream media. And so they're literally like just out being like, look, I'll talk to you, or can you write a story on me? And I usually have to be like, no.
Yeah. And are they pitching like a certain angle or story, or is it literally like, just write the story on me?
It's a business story. It's always a business story. It's always like, write a story about my business. I'm doing this. Write a story about how I made $5,000 this summer. Write a story about whatever. It's always that, which is great. It's inspiring. I wish I could tell all of these kids stories. But I usually I like to hear it, or I'll read it. I'll read their DM and then kind of be like, if it ladders up to something I'm writing about. A lot of kids just want to go viral. Or they send me weird stuff. I've definitely gotten like a lot of inappropriate memes, but that's fine. It's the internet. So I'd rather like be getting more messages and have to filter through them than not be hearing from people. And I try to respond to everyone that's genuine.
How do you pick which stories to actually write? Like if you have 100 kids who DM you all these ridiculous things, like how do you pick which one is actually the one you write?
Well, I don't ever really write stories. I don't really write many stories about one person. That Rowan kid I wrote about because he had sort of like, he was so intertwined in so many things that I had covered that I was like, let me just like look at this one kid and use him as an example. And so it's usually that. It's like, I'll look at one thing. I'll want to write about some trend and I'll kind of find some people that fit with it. A lot of people like consider me a youth reporter, I guess, because I write about so many young people, but I really don't like skew that way. It's more like I notice an interesting trend or user behavior, and then it ends up being like young people behind it. But I'll usually kind of like lead with the interesting trend and then try to find people that validate it or whatever, instead of the other way around, like trying to tell some kid's story. But
yeah, which leads me to the point of like, in this weird internet culture world, like you've become somewhat of an influencer to a lot of these kids, and even to the point where I think I saw you tweet that you've got 100,000+ people on TikTok and things like that. Like, how has that been for you as an experience of like going from constantly writing about it to now like, hey, I got 100,000 people on this one platform, tens of thousands on Instagram or 100 or on Twitter. Like, how does that change the way you view the platforms?
yeah, I know. I got 400,000 on TikTok and I was like, well, this app is so inflated. I told Corey, my boss, that if I get 500,000, I'm going to quit and join the Hype House, be the Hype House mother. But no, I don't know. I mean, I started on Tumblr. Like I was pretty big on Tumblr in my own sort of worlds, and I ran some popular Tumblrs. And when I started out, I ran social media for a bunch of really big brands. So I'm familiar with, I think, coming from like the ad agency world too, where you're like speaking, like I kind of am familiar with speaking to a lot of followers or having that voice, I guess. But I would say the thing that I don't like the most is just how overwhelmed I get with people asking me for things. That's the main thing. I don't mind if it's kids asking me for things, but just people ask me to do everything for them. And I'm like so lazy. I'm like, I want to be helpful, but sometimes I'm like, no, I can't, do your whole research thing for you, for your company or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. What did you post on TikTok to get 400,000 followers?
Oh, well, so I honestly just was posting like behind the scenes stuff of my job. Like, I mean, I'm with a lot. The thing is like I know a lot of YouTubers personally, I guess, through my job, and I know a lot of like TikTokers through my job. So, I'll be with them at certain points. And so I've posted some like behind the scenes videos of some TikTokers, and all of these kids started following me and messaging me being like, how can I get your job? It's so cool. And I always like to advocate for New York Times because a lot of these kids, that's their first introduction to the New York Times. And definitely when I was young, I thought that the mainstream media was so far removed. And so I always want to respond to them. So yeah, and then I wrote a story about OK Boomer, this TikTok trend, and a lot of kids thought that was really funny that I was on TikTok. And so they were duetting me, and then I had a couple Subway videos go viral, and I don't know, it just added up. but now I'm stuck in quarantine. I don't know what I'm going to do. My content's fallen off.
Well, look, there's a lot of kids who are in the same situation. That's why I guess they're pulling their moms and dads into.
Yeah, I'm alone in my New York apartment. I need to get some parents involved.
Awesome. What are you looking forward to the rest of this year? Is it just more of kind of understanding what those internet culture trends are, or anything else that you got on the horizon?
Honestly, I think you were asking me how I pick stories. I have a list of like 80 stories, and the only thing that it slows me down is like my editor is saying like, don't focus on this, or just me being slow kind of, and not filing them faster. So my goal is to just, keep writing about the stuff that I care about, and, trying to get some of these other projects that I do a bunch of stuff on the side. So I'm trying to like do more of that. And I don't know, I just, meet new cool people. That's my goal every year, is to try to like make new friends every year, and like connect with new cool people every year. So just trying to do that. It's hard, when on Twitter, it's like, there's so many people coming at you. And sometimes when you, get too much of an audience, not like 100,000 followers or something is too much of an audience, but sometimes it's like, it's hard to make those more personal connections. So I just want to make sure I'm still meeting people, even though I'm stuck in this apartment.
Yeah, there's no shortage of people on the internet for sure.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I appreciate you doing this. Where can people connect with you, find you? I know you're kind of all over the internet. Where do you want to send them?
Yeah, definitely just DM me anywhere, on Instagram or Twitter. I love DMs. It's never weird if you slide to my DMs. I love hearing from people, as long as they're not like asking me to do some project for them for free. But like, yeah, just like send me stuff, or you can email me as well. My email address is like in my bio. It's just taylor.lorenz@nytimes.com. So, but yeah, I'm just follow me on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok now.
I am jealous of your TikTok fame, because I feel like you have a pulse on a completely different part of the internet that if people aren't on TikTok, they don't see it. And Polina recently pulled up TikTok and started showing me some of the videos, and I was amazed at the level of detail and obvious work that went into just like some of these dances and stuff. I was just like, what are people doing?
The dances are next level. I like cannot. I wrote this story about the girl that created the Renegade, which was this very popular dance, and like she was in her room trying to show it to me, and I was just like, I forgot. I can only remember 3 steps of this dance. Also, like every kid now, I feel like can do a backflip, and I'm just like, how is it that every teenager suddenly can do like I didn't know anyone that could do a backflip growing up. Like, get on TikTok. I feel like kids are evolving or something. I don't know.
Well, they probably never had to practice because the internet wasn't there, right? So now all of a sudden it's like, hey, I can go viral for doing a backflip. Let me work on doing a backflip.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
All right. Well, listen, I appreciate taking the time to do this. I think people will really enjoy kind of understanding all of this, and then we'll have to do it again as more kids do crazy stuff on the internet and keep evolving culture.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I feel like I've known you on the internet for so long, so it's been great to chat.